Thank you for tuning in to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and I thank you for watching. This is another episode where I'm going to go through a CD collection. This time around, it's going to be my Bad Company CD collection. These CDs started being purchased in the early 90s for me, so there's a mixture of originals and some reissues, so we'll get to it. The classic debut Bad Company album came out in 1974 originally on Swan Song Atlantic. And this CD that I have is a Canadian Columbia House issue, and it's from the 1994 remasters collection. So it looks a little bit newer, and that is why the first two Bad Company albums have since been reissued in deluxe editions. I don't have any of those. Got the Swan Song logo on the CD. That's really the way you can tell this is a newer issue of it. When I say newer, it's relatively newer. No lyrics inside of this, just the song titles, credits, band photo. The record was a gatefold. Add that on that. And the second Bad Company album came out, credited to the same year, 1974. Straight Shooter. Cool album cover. This is not, as you can see right away, this is not the 1994 reissue. This is based on the original CD issue from sometime in the 80s. And that little signature right there, or characters, indicates it is a Columbia House. This is how, just for those of you that were too young to remember or never was a member of Columbia House, this CD is basically what it would look like if you purchased it in a store, except for this, because that's the catalog number for Bad Company Straight Shooter. And if you wanted it on cassette, instead of having a T at the end of it, it would have a C. So this is what the back cover looked like, very much more of a generic CD. And the CD itself looked like just another Atlantic CD with the Swan Song logo on there. Back cover. And no pictures or anything, and very minimal credits, but I don't think there was much inside the original album either. The next Bad Company album, third Bad Company album, came out in, according to this, 1976. I always thought it was 75. This is Run with the Pack. This is another digital remaster. This one's actually a German copy. Don't ask me how I ended up with a German copy. I just did. So there you go. Swan Song logo on the CD itself, and very little inside the credits. And this was a gatefold photo inside the album. Next one, this is an older CD as far as the issue of it. The fourth Bad Company album, Burnin' Sky. Nothing written on the front cover. And this is a Canadian issue, Swan Song Atlantic. Typical back cover. No graphics or anything. Back cover, this is the back cover of the record of that scene. This actually has, this folds out. It's still very little inside of it. It's just kind of a different album for them. Didn't have any hit singles off of it. No top 40 singles off of that one. Next one, 1979, Desolation Angels. This has the sort of trademark Hypnosis album art on it, very abstract looking. This was a bit of, at the time, it was a bit of a comeback for the group after Burnin' Sky. This had Rock and Roll Fantasy, which is the biggest hit they'd had in a long time. Gone, Gone, Gone was another great song off of this too. This is a US edition. There's the CD. Back cover of the booklet. And just various scenes. This is very Hypnosis. If you were to look at this and then compare it to, say, Led Zeppelin's Presence album, there's a style there that they were known for. The last Bad Company album to feature the original lineup came out in 1982. rough diamonds, and the original album was die cut, so these pictures were different on the inside. You'd pull the record out. This is an old Canadian Atlantic issue, or it's a U.S. It's U.S. It's not Canadian, but it is quite old. The original issue of the CD. Not much inside of it either. So that band went on hiatus, and in 1985, Atlantic released it's probably pretty common in a lot of CD collections, 10 from 6, meaning 10 songs from 6 albums. So if you look down here in the corner, there's a little bit of the cover art from each of the Bad Company albums. And on the back, there's indications of where the albums came from. What I've always found strange about this, there's nothing from Burnin' Sky on here. So even though it's 10 songs from 6 albums, it's really 10 from 5. I don't know why they just didn't add a song. There's only 10 songs on here. They could have put the song Burnin' Sky on here. Either instead of, I don't know, something like Live for the Music, or I just don't know why they didn't do it that way. This is one of those strange decisions I'll never know the answer to, but would love to. This is a Canadian Columbia House issue. And usual Atlantic CD. That's from the Burnin' Sky album. Silhouette. And not much inside of it either. So, of course, by this time, Paul Rogers was working with Jimmy Page very briefly in the firm. The surviving members of Bad Company got together and, I guess, entered a period they're not very fond of. But with Atlantic Records' insistence that they call themselves Bad Company and get another singer, they did. They got a guy named Brian Howe, great singer, very high-range singer, totally different sound than Paul Rogers. And the first album that this lineup came out with, very rare CD in my collection, Fame and Fortune, came out in 1986. This is a really poppy album for them. Like really poppy. It was produced by, or co-produced by Mick Jones, a foreigner, and it sounds a lot more like the Foreigner stuff of the time than it ever sounds like Bad Company. So, I'm sure in a lot of fan circles it's not an album that is well liked. It hasn't really aged that well. This lineup got a lot better, but I'm glad to have this. I was surprised to find it. It's very, very rare. It went out of print, for years. And this is actually the last album that bass player Boz Burrell appeared on. He bowed out, I think, even before this tour began. Now, big time improvement happened in 1988 when they released this album, Dangerous Age. Sort of going to put you in mind of Van Halen's 1984. This is actually a really good album, and the sales backed it up. It went gold. This was released, any Atlantic CDs that came out in 1988 had the 40th anniversary logo on it, so I'll just show that there. So, 40th anniversary of Atlantic Records. Don't Smoke Without a Fire and Shake It Up were album rock hits off this that got a little bit of airplay. Said, still doesn't sound like original Bad Company. It's just a good late 80s hard rock album. And unfortunately, Brian Howe had a falling out with the rest of the band. They totally disregard this period. So there is Brian Howe with Mick Ralphs and Simon Kirke. This CD actually has a song on it called Excited, the last track, that was not on the record or cassette. But this album got them sort of back into being a band of any note at all. It's actually No Smoke Without a Fire video's first time I ever heard of Bad Company. So for a younger generation, this was the introduction to it. I guess you could superficially compare it to Van Halen. A lot of people didn't like when Sammy Hagar joined, and I do, because that's when I got on board. But they really were two different bands. So I guess you can kind of look at it the same. So the next album to come up from this lineup, 1990, Holy Water. Kind of faded there on the side. This is a Canadian Columbia House edition. From now, at this time, they switched from Atlantic to Atco, which is the same label, just a different division of it. And this album actually was a platinum seller for them. Atco had the blue look instead of red. Still a red ring around it. So this album sold over 1 million copies. Main reason for that is they had a big hit with If You Needed Somebody, which is a power ballad. Something like number 16 on the Billboard pop chart, so got a lot of airplay. And just the lyrics there. Next thing to come up from Bad Company, it was in 1992. Here Comes Trouble. This album went gold, but it eventually ended up in the cutout bins. And what I've got is a US edition, still on Atco. Minor hit off of this single was the song How About That. You can see on the side here, I put a new case on it. There was a chunk taken out of it, as they did with out of print deleted albums. That's what the CD looks like. A little bit of credits in here. And this also came with a survey about the album and about like music listening habits in general, and whether you watched MTV or not, or what magazines you read, or what radio stations you listened to. So it's aimed at the U.S. market, and it's payable to Atco East West Records. Interesting. Oh yeah, thanks for buying a record. See you on tour. I'm guessing that other albums on the same label around the same time contained a similar survey. 1993, a live album came out from this lineup, from that tour, called The Best of Bad Company Live, What You Hear Is What You Get. And this is the first time officially that people get to hear what Brian Howe sounded like singing the Paul Rodgers stuff. And I think he does a fine job on it. He's got a naturally high range, so for him to sing the Paul Rodgers stuff, it probably gave his voice a bit of a break. No, he doesn't have, you know, Paul Rodgers' soulful voice, no, but he's got all the vocal chops. And by this time, as you'll see on this back cover, they had Rick Wills on bass, who was a member of Foreigner, so there's connections with a lot of these old bands, and they manifest themselves sometimes. This is a Canadian Columbia House issue that I got. It's actually quite a good album, quite a good live album, and a good mix of songs, too. Like if they put out a single CD with the original versions of all these songs, it would be about as good a single disc Bad Company anthology as you'll ever get. But nowadays, the anthologies that have come out tend to omit the Brian Howe years, unfortunately. And so far, what is to this date the newest Bad Company studio album came out in 1995. It's called Company of Strangers. This is a Canadian Columbia House issue on East West Atlantic Records. By this time, they got a new singer, a guy named Robert Hart. Sounds a lot like Brian Howe, similar type of vocal style. I didn't really care for this album that much. It was okay. I like without popping it in, very few of the songs stick in my head. And I don't know. Maybe that's why they haven't released anything new. I don't know. There are a few new tracks that have come out, and I'll get to those. The following year, 1996, this release came out, Stories Told and Untold. This is basically an unplugged album, and it's got a couple of new songs on it, but overall it's a mix of songs from all of the periods of their career. Canadian Columbia House issue, this one is. Don't particularly... This isn't one I throw on. Same lineup that was on the previous album. They do have a few guests on here. Richie Sambora from Bon Jovi, for example. Well, at the time, appears on this. It was pretty quiet for a few years. And then 1998, 1999, the original 4 members of Bad Company got back together. They went on tour. And I think they did fairly well on tour. So this came out, and Columbia House got it, therefore I got it. The original Bad Company anthology. So the whole cover of this looks somewhat like the first album, and in there it's got the rest of the albums featuring the original lineup. This came out in 1999 on Atlantic, or, well, Elektra to be exact, because there was some switchover in the distribution. This had some B-sides on it. some different mixes of songs, and the last 4 songs on disc 2 were brand new, newly recorded songs from the original lineup, all of which were quite good. Still, it comes in one of these big CD cases. Okay, so there's what the CD itself looked like. Behind that, on the tray, that's what the band looked like in 1999, the original 4. And if you flip over to disc 2, that's what disc 2 looked like. And of course, there's a booklet, thick booklet that comes with this, which is the main reason, well, that and the slipcase is why I've never put them in sort of an original, never been able to put them in one of the slim sleeves, or slim cases. Photo from the first album. And lots of press reports, advertisements, memorabilia, and basically the story of Bad Company. Magazine covers, lyrics to all the songs. So, you know, a good collection. Something for, if you just want to listen to the early stuff, that's as good as it gets. And we'll continue with that. In 2016, Rhino Records, or Swan Song in cooperation with Rhino Records, however you want to look at it, released a couple of archived concerts, live 1977 and 1979, featuring, of course, the original lineup. And this is a really good CD. The disc 1 was recorded in May of '77 in Houston, Texas, and the second disc was recorded at Wembley in London, England, in March of 1979. Some songs overlap, of course. It was the 2 concerts as they were. And this is a really, really good, I think that would have been a good live band to see back in the day. Swan Song, reproduction of this is what the old records looked like on the label. And yeah, this is a worthwhile addition to Bad Company collection. And a booklet that came with it, of course, with a write-up not dissimilar to the one that came out inside the box set. You know, while these guys are still kicking, I wouldn't mind hearing some new music from Bad Company, so you never know. Simon Kirke has done a lot of solo work, and recently he's stated that he'd like some new Bad Company music, so you never know, we might see it. So that's a look at my Bad Company CD collection. Thanks for watching Tim's Vinyl Confessions.